Hey there, welcome to my channel. This is our cross Canada trip, day number 1. Larry, Delia, Rita, and me. We had these shirts made for our trip and we were ready to head out all the way across Canada. We started off with a nice dinner, a night out at Jubilation's Dinner Theatre in Calgary. And then the next day, a little bit of a wet morning to start, but we packed up the car, got the motorcycle ready, and then headed out on the highway, the Trans-Canada Highway number 1, from Calgary, Alberta to Swift Current, Saskatchewan. It was cool, but we were comfortable with our proper gear on, but as the forecast told us, it was going to rain, and it did. Thankfully, we had good rain gear, and we were able to keep ourselves warm and dry with that. And our first day is in the books, and now we head to day number 2. Day number 2 puts us back on the Trans-Canada all the way to Brandon, Manitoba. We stopped in at Moose Jaw to see Mac the Moose, the world's tallest moose, and he was always willing to pose for pictures with tourists like us. There are tunnels made underneath the city of Moose Jaw, and this was used during the Prohibition years to smuggle whiskey from Canada into the United States. Even Al Capone, right in the middle there, smuggled whiskey from Moose Jaw. They would hide the whiskey in jars labeled maple syrup. Very sneaky. Lots of churches along the way, and we'll see a number of them on this trip. And Moose Jaw even had a Canadian snowbird plane on display. Very nice. The Trans-Canada Highway through Saskatchewan is clear and flat mostly, some rolling hills, and the weather was pretty good. We stopped in Moosomin at the DQ for some treats along the way until we finally arrived in Brandon, Manitoba, which has its own interesting places to see as well. So that's day 2. Day 3 takes us from Brandon, Manitoba, around Winnipeg to Kenora, Ontario. We stopped in Winnipeg at the Royal Canadian Mint. That makes more than just coins. It also made the medals for the Vancouver 2010 Winter Olympics. Plus they make coins for other countries all around the world. Very interesting. In Winnipeg, we stopped at the Forks Market, which was a very cool place that they've established there right by the waters, and lovely shops and places to eat inside. And the waterfront by the Red River was a very relaxing place to be. Now, the Trans-Canada Highway is the only highway that connects Eastern and Western Canada. So if that highway shuts down, you ain't getting through there. As you can see, the road is 2 lanes now, and we're heading into Ontario and coming up to the Welcome to Ontario sign. Met back up with Larry and Delia before we entered the province of Ontario. Ontario has lakes, and this is one of many as we are coming into Kenora, our stop for the night. A very lovely ride once again. Day 4 takes us from Kenora to Thunder Bay, still in Ontario, and the highway is mostly 2-lane, and it goes through some very rocky terrain. We're in the Great Canadian Shield here. But again, lakes and lakes and lakes, and trees and trees and trees. It's just lovely to ride beside the water. There's always lots to see as we travel along. The roads had some curves in them, nothing too technical, just nice big sweepers. And again, the trees seem to be endless in Ontario. We stopped at Kakabeka Falls, which was quite impressive. Never knew it existed. And the sound of the water, wow, it's just powerful to watch. And you can see that there's a lot of water coming over those falls. And it was very special to stop at the Terry Fox Memorial, which marks the point where Terry Fox was forced to stop his run across Canada with his Marathon of Hope. Day number 5, we continue on the Trans-Canada around Lake Superior, with a stop first at Silver Islet, which is a cute little place, and they discovered silver there long back, and it's amazing the story. You should read about how they found silver there. The highway, again, is lined with trees, and it's plowed through rock, the Canadian Shield. And there was even a Rita Lake, which Rita, of course, had to pose beside. There's a cool bridge as you are leaving Thunder Bay and continuing on the Trans-Canada, and we will actually visit this bridge again on our way back, but coming at it from a different route. Trans-Canada is just beautiful. The scenery, there's Lake Superior again, always huge and before us. We stopped for lunch in Terrace Bay, where they have a lighthouse you can actually climb up inside of. This is Magpie Falls at Wawa, Ontario, which was our destination for the day. Very spidery looking water pouring down over the rocks. And of course, Wawa has their famous goose, Canada Goose. And there is my BMW sitting on the side of the road, looking good as always. Day 6 was from Wawa all the way around to Sudbury, Ontario. We finally get around Lake Superior, but the weather was cool and foggy and wet in the morning. We found this cool little break spot here for some coffee and goodies, and back on the Trans-Canada, and there's still water. No matter where you go, you're going to be riding by water. We ended up in Sault Ste. Marie for our lunch stop, and it was quite cool to see across the water was the United States, Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan. And there's the Soo Line Ferry that'll take you on tours of the locks that are there. Just a little off the highway was this Black Bear Cafe and Eatery, which was very delicious. Finally arrived in Sudbury, Ontario, and we saw this huge smokestack, which they're going to demolish, so it might not be there if you go there. Interesting also was this guy riding down the middle of the main drag on his scooter. And of course, you can't avoid seeing the Sudbury nickel when you go to Sudbury. Day number 7, we're still in Ontario, but we're heading to our nation's capital, Ottawa. The Trans-Canada Highway is still in great shape and lined with trees, beautiful all the time. In Ottawa is the Fairmont Chateau Laurier. Beautiful architecture. These buildings are just massive and ornately designed and just beautiful. Lots to see. We walked around Ottawa our first day there, and we also went to Rideau Canal in Ottawa, and this looks amazing. It doesn't even look real sometimes, but that is the Rideau Canal, which empties into the Ottawa River. On the other side of the Ottawa River is Gatineau, Quebec. Beautiful sunset picture looking down the locks here. They also have the War Memorial in Ottawa and, of course, the Parliament buildings. We couldn't go inside. They were renovating, but there's so much to see around the Parliament building. We stayed in Ottawa a second day to take in more of the amazing architecture and buildings there. Not only government buildings, but we went to Notre Dame Cathedral and just look at the design and the meticulous work made to craft all of this. Beautiful stained glass windows. You could spend a long time in there just taking in the beauty. There's Gatineau, Quebec, across the river, the Ottawa River, and apparently you could take a canoe and go all the way down to Boston from here. Quite something. There is the National Art Museum there with quite the spider. Hope you're not afraid of spiders. And the Supreme Court of Canada, which we are very fortunate to be able to not only just go inside the beautiful and massive foyer, but we also got to go up into the chambers, which are usually reserved for tour guests only. We packed up the saddlebags back onto the motorcycle and heading on a short day to Montreal from Ottawa, still on the Trans-Canada Highway. We went down to Old Montreal, the port of Montreal, and saw beautiful cathedrals there as well. A massive pipe organ. There is so many picture opportunities in this city. You can see the ornate design. Look at the ceiling. Just who did that and how did they do it? The Port of Montreal has, of course, docks, but it also has amusement park with rides for kids and adults and a zip line. And the cobblestone streets are just historic and beautiful to walk down. We had to, of course, try authentic Montreal poutine, and it was delicious, with, of course, our patriotic Canada Dry drink along with it. Beautiful square. There's just so much to see in Montreal. Day number 10 had us traveling on another short trip to Quebec City from Montreal. Our first stop at Montmorency Falls, which are impressive as well. They're higher than Niagara Falls, they tell us, and you're able to go right up to the top. You can also see a staircase going down the other side there, and that is a view of the St. Lawrence River and the bridge going across it. And here's some video, again, showing the amount of water that tumbles over these falls day in and day out. This is the site of a battle between the French and the British as well, and there's a lot of history here. And then in Quebec City itself, we were able to go into the Citadel, which is on the Plains of Abraham, which is a very significant place of battling between the U.S. forces and Canadian forces as well. Also the beautiful Chateau Frontenac, which has welcomed visitors from around the world. Quebec, of course, has poutine as well, and it was delicious. And they also have a tunnel that goes right under the St. Lawrence River. It's massive. And here's a sped up version of us going through the tunnel. And it's quite something to think of all that water that is above you as you travel along. Day 11 was our second day in Quebec City. We saw the museum on the Plains of Abraham and learned more about the history of that area, the battles that were fought and won, and how this was established. They also had their own way of justice, of shaming people by making them wear their crime around their necks, which was quite something. And our hotel had a water slide, and I never miss an opportunity to go down a water slide. Day number 12 was our longest and dreariest day and windy, all the way to Fredericton, New Brunswick, along the Trans-Canada Highway. We stopped at the longest covered bridge in the world. It was under construction, so we couldn't drive through it, but the Heartland Covered Bridge goes across the St. John River, and you can still see it and walk through it if you like. And in Fredericton, across the St. John River, they have the Bill Thorpe Walking Bridge, which is part of a giant network of trails called the Trans-Canada Trail. Also, lovely cathedral there in Fredericton, and that's the end of day 12. Day 13, we enter yet another province. We go from New Brunswick into PEI across the Confederation Bridge. They have a sign giving you one last chance to turn around if you don't want to go across the bridge, because it's about 13 kilometers that is going all the way across the St. Lawrence. What an engineering feat. And it's so cool to be driving across this bridge that spans the St. Lawrence. in the capital of Charlottetown. They have magnificent cathedral as well. And then we drove down to Point Prim Lighthouse, which is very well preserved. And you can actually go up to the very top of that lighthouse, some very steep stairs, so not if you don't like heights. They also have a working foghorn there that Rita was more than happy to demonstrate for us. The panoramic view from up top there is just amazing to see the coastline of Prince Edward Island. We then rode across to the other side of the island to Cavendish Cliffs, and you can see the red earth there in the cliffs. And then it was off to L.M. Montgomery's Green Gables Museum. Wonderful. Day 14, we traveled to Sydney, Nova Scotia in preparation to catch the ferry across to Newfoundland. We stopped in Truro, Nova Scotia and went to the Victoria Falls Park there. They have Jacob's Ladder, which I had to attempt to run up because apparently Sidney Crosby runs up and down these steps as part of his training. And you will not see me make it all the way, but I was still wearing my motorcycle riding boots. The falls there are not huge falls, but it's a very beautiful park. Lots of hiking trails, well marked, well maintained, and very peaceful. You could just relax, take your time and enjoy it. Then we crossed over to Cape Breton on the bridge there and headed to Sydney. And here's a little shot of what some of the roads look like on the way to Sydney on Cape Breton Island. Nice big sweeping curves, beautiful, and trees and trees and trees. And a lovely stop for dinner at Mary and Huey's place before we boarded the ferry, which was going to be like our hotel for the night. So this is the end of day 14 and the beginning of day 15. And on day 15, we finally enter the last province on our trip, Newfoundland. We arrived in Port aux Basques in the morning and came up to the ferry terminal there. Lovely little village along the coastline there. Very peaceful setting as we arrived on what is affectionately known as The Rock, Newfoundland. We rode along and you can see some of the mountains in the middle of the land and then also the coastline on the other side until we arrived in Gander, Newfoundland. And during 9/11, Gander, Newfoundland was where a lot of planes had to be diverted to on 9/11, and this memorial is set up there in the middle of the town square. Day 16 marks the halfway point of our trip as we make the final leg from Gander to St. John's, Newfoundland on the Trans-Canada. We were held up with a bad traffic accident, but we got to meet a local Newfoundlander who was very friendly and informative. We took a little jaunt off the Trans-Canada out to Cape Bonavista and even saw some icebergs along the way, which was cool. They have a lighthouse there, of course, at Cape Bonavista. Very colorful and well maintained. And now you can see why it's called The Rock, because it is just rock. There's a nice little ice cream spot close to Cape Bonavista for a break. And there's some icebergs floating along beside Newfoundland. And then we went out to see the puffins. And apparently they're not always there, so we were very fortunate to be there on a day where the puffins were actually there. And they're cute little guys. They like to hide in these little holes in the rocks along the cliff, and then they jump off and fly down to wherever they're going. And the beautiful Trans-Canada Highway led us right into St. John's, Newfoundland, where we could toast and celebrate. We made it all the way across Canada. Day 17 was our second day in St. John's, Newfoundland. Started off with an oil change for my bike at the Toy Box. Then a hike up to Signal Hill, where you could see a beautiful panorama of St. John's, Newfoundland and the coastal areas. Beautiful. We then picked up Larry's car from the shop where he was getting an oil change and went out to Cape Spear, the easternmost point of North America and Canada, of course. And there's a lighthouse still there. That is the original one, not operational. There we are at the easternmost point of Canada with the Atlantic Ocean behind us. And you can even take some stairs and go down even closer to the ocean. Cape Spear was also a military base during World War II, and these bunkers were created underneath the rocks. And this was before Newfoundland was even a part of Canada. We didn't realize it was the 50th anniversary of Cape Spear being a national park, and we got interviewed by the CBC while we were there. Back into St. John's, Newfoundland to see some of the local sites, beautiful artwork, pubs with live music. Cheers! Great vibe. Day 18, we got to experience Newfoundland weather, rain, drizzle, or fog. That's what we were told. Those are the three types of weather. And you can see it was very foggy as we left St. John's and could hardly see the cars coming to us. But we pressed on our journey on the Trans-Canada Highway to Corner Brook. It was also chilly, but heated grips and seats sure helped out, and wearing the rain gear to keep our warmth inside as we traveled along. We came to Bishop Falls about halfway along the way. Very interesting place to stop, and they got quite the power system there, and you also can do some salmon fishing apparently. Here's the falls at work. And then we pressed on to Corner Brook in preparation for heading towards the ferry on the next day. The next day, day 19, we woke up to rain, and cold. It was terrible, but we had to make our ferry, and this is what happened to the Garmin, and when we hit a pothole hidden in a puddle. Shattered it. Amazingly, we found it. You want more of the story, you can look at each individual day of our journey on my YouTube channel as well. We're waiting for the ferry. We're frozen. We're wet. And it's just raining steadily, never stopping. They provided straps, but not the kind I would use. I'll bring my own next time. And you can see how cold it was. My fingers were white. And yeah, we were soaked, as you'll see in these pictures. The rain just was steady, unrelenting, and cold and wet for sure. But we made it to the ferry for the 8-hour ride back to Sydney, Nova Scotia. And there we are, ready to leave Port aux Basques. Day 20, we left Sydney and headed on the Cabot Trail around Cape Breton Island. Beautiful road. You just have to ride on the Cabot Trail. Curves and trees and coastline. It's just rugged and beautiful. It's a rider's paradise for sure. Stopped at the Bitsy Bean Cafe and Bakery, and they do have great stuff to eat there, so you can stop in there and warm yourself up. It's actually a nice temperature day, and you can see the road just curves and has elevation changes and more of the same. It's just an amazing road. You have to experience it. It's hard to describe. You can see the purple line on our shattered Garmin to show the twisty roads that are ahead. And here's a video showing how we cranked along on some of these curvy roads. Enjoy. It's amazing that Rita can hang on to the phone and take these videos from behind and not hold on when I am cranked over and scraping the pegs. Day 21, we headed from New Glasgow down to Halifax, all on secondary roads. Went down to Peggy's Cove. Beautiful little roads to drive on. We stayed off the main roads as much as possible. That's our plan for the whole route back to Calgary. Secondary roads, doing our shunpiking. A cousin of ours has Vision Air Services, and so we got to go to the hangar and see his fleet of helicopters, and pretty amazing to see. It was cold and wet. We still went to Peggy's Cove, and beautiful boardwalk down there. You have to watch out, the rocks are slippery, so stay on the path. There's the most photographed lighthouse in the world, and the view of the rugged coastline of Nova Scotia. Lovely. And you can see some of the roads here, they kind of look reddish, and that's because they use of course, the rocks and the earth from the surrounding area to make the roads, and it's got a very reddish hue to it. Beautiful tree-lined roads. You just sit back and enjoy the ride. From Moncton, we went to Rimouski, Quebec, and again, we went off the Trans-Canada and along the northern shores, let's say, of Nova Scotia and into Quebec. You can see again what the roads look like. This is coming to Quebec, and here we are crossing the bridge to Miramichi. I'm sure I'm saying it wrong. And this will give you a sense here of crossing the bridge. Our lunch stop was at a little restaurant called La Source. We got to meet the owner, who was the head of Cross Country Skiing Canada and also internationally for the Olympics. And finally, we entered La Belle Province, Quebec, and rode along beautiful rivers and saw numerous churches. Every little place had a very ornate church compared to the size of the town, and often there was a cemetery across the street or in the yard of the church as well. And you can imagine how old some of those cemeteries are. Enjoy the view of some of the many churches that we saw along the way. Sadly, we also saw crosses at the side of the road, often where accidents had happened. That's a good reminder. 23, we stayed in Quebec from Rimouski to Trois-Rivières. We did not go on the Trans-Canada, but on a little side highways, highway number 132. Stopped in at a lovely little cafe for coffee in a small little town out of the way. You got to stop at these places. They're just wonderful. And then we continued on along the St. Lawrence River to our right, and there's the lone tree in the field for some reason. A lot of Can-Am spiders we saw riding on the roads. And also, some of the towns, the roads were so narrow that the houses came right down to the street. Not down to the sidewalk, but actually right down to the street. You had to be careful walking out your front door. From Trois-Rivières, we went to Kingston, Ontario on not the Trans-Canada. We ducked off of it and went on secondary roads as much as possible through cute little towns, and they had their own little charm and their own breweries. And then we drove along the Thousand Islands Parkway. You must ride along here. There's a bridge heading over to the United States. Across the St. Lawrence, and yeah, you can just see how lovely things are. This traffic is not too bad there, but amazingly on these little Thousand Islands they build houses, and sometimes the houses span across to 2 islands, which is quite amazing. Wonder how they get in and out of the garage. I think the garage is probably for the boat. And then we arrived in Kingston, Ontario. Lovely place. So much history there. Day 25, we skirted around Toronto and ended up in Niagara Falls. again, lovely roads to drive along, beautiful scenery. Along the 407 that skirts Toronto, they have these cameras on the on-ramps and off-ramps because it's normally a toll highway. Thankfully, it wasn't a toll highway when we were there. They had a reprieve of that during that time. But it's super wide and easy to drive. We stopped in Hamilton, had lunch with a friend that Rita lived with years back in Calgary, and that's her sister along as well. Came to Niagara Falls, and of course you know what's at Niagara Falls. The falls. That's the American side of the falls, and then you will see the Canadian side of the falls. There's the famous horseshoe with one of the boats taking you into the mist. It's just unbelievable. The pictures are awesome, but the experience of being beside that water as it just pours over the falls, you feel the force, you feel the mist. And very fortunately, we got to stay at a sister of Delia's friend in Niagara Falls. From Niagara Falls, it was on to Sudbury again staying off the Trans-Canada, going on back roads, small little towns. Here we are crossing the bridge at Hamilton, and you can't see it, but a deer actually ran across the highway just ahead of us there. We didn't get it on video, unfortunately. But the back roads are just beautiful. They're narrow and scenic, trees and trees, and watch out for the animals. We saw some animals that had been hit, a bear and a moose. But enjoy this little snippet here. We had a little break in Parry Sound, stopped at a Dairy Queen, and when we came out, the parking lot was filled with Can-Am Spyders and that Chevy Nova that you saw there. And yeah, seems to be a favorite stop for bikers. Very nice. They had a sign warning people to watch for motorcycles. And again, you can see the roads carved through the Canadian Shield. The rocks are always there. After Sudbury, we went north up to Hearst, Ontario, went through Timmins, Ontario, the home of Shania Twain, in case you didn't know. And we thought the roads would be kind of rough, not well kept, but they were smooth and they were well maintained, and the scenery just takes your breath away. There was a nice stop along the way before Timmins, cute little coffee shop and gas station. We got some goodies to eat there. And then on the way, we continued into the northern parts of Ontario with just almost no traffic. And the speed limit says 80, but nobody seems to do that speed. And we were fine with that. We had some construction along the way, had to watch out. Gravel was wet from recent rain, and there were water trucks coming along. And the fun little town of Moonbeam. And finally to Hearst, Ontario, with the water tower that many communities seem to have. Day 28, we continued on these northern roads, as you can see, all the way to Thunder Bay, Ontario. There's a small gas station at Long Lake to stop for coffee and bathroom break, and then it was back into the wet, wet, wet roads. Now we travel back to Kenora, Ontario, but we go on a different highway. Stays close to the United States border. Went to the Arctic watershed along the way, where all the rivers from the north side head up to the Arctic Ocean from this point, and all the rivers on the south side head down to the Atlantic Ocean. Very interesting to be at that geographical point. The roads, again, were lovely. 2 lanes, well maintained, beautiful scenery as we headed to Fort Frances for our lunch stop. And then we headed north with the clouds threatening. We thought we would miss the rain, but no, we didn't. And because it had been so warm, I think it was in the high 20s, you can see steam rising off the road from the water that had fallen. That's how warm it was. But The road was enjoyable just the same as we headed back to Kenora with a celebratory meal and drink at the Lake of the Woods Brewery. Now, if you recall, the Trans-Canada Highway is the only way to get from Kenora back into Western Canada. So we had to go that far on it to Winnipeg, and then we went off the highway. And we stayed mostly on the Red Coat Trail. This was the trail that the Mounties took to head to the southern part of Saskatchewan and Alberta to take care of some whiskey runners and lawlessness that was happening out there. At one point, Larry and Delia had to pass us because they were being tailgated by a semi for some reason. Lovely little lunch stop at the Spruce Woods Inn, and then we were back on the Red Coat Trail. Even saw Starbuck, the town. And there is a little monument that they have to signify the Red Coat Trail. Day 31, we continued on the Red Coat Trail. Nice little sign showing that we really are on it. And the road looks pretty straight, and you might think it was boring, but actually there's a lot of cool little places to ride through. And there is still scenery to see along the way, and even has a few little dips and valleys that we came to. Sky, you can see, is showing that it's going to rain, and it actually did rain before we made it to Shaunavon, Saskatchewan. Here's a cool little train trestle that we rode underneath. You can see the valley dips down and then back up the other side. I had a little lunch stop at the Wood River Bar and Grill in La Flèche. Very lovely, cool little spot. And of course, no ride would be complete without the lone tree in the middle of a field. We finally come to our last day, Shaunavon, Saskatchewan to Calgary, Alberta. This was our original route. As you can see, we had to stay on the Trans-Canada for a bit, and then we were going to veer off. But we ended up staying on the Trans-Canada the whole way because it was pouring rain and super windy. When we left, it didn't look too bad, but it didn't improve. In fact, it got worse. The Trans-Canada was soaked. We were unable to pass most of the time, even on the freeway, because of the road spray from the vehicles we were trying to pass, especially the semis. We finally turned off at Gleichen and found a lovely Petrocan that thankfully took us in, gave us coffee to warm us up, and we were just dripping wet. They had to get a mop out and clean up the floor because the water was just pouring off of us. Thank you to the owners and the staff there. And finally, we made it. We saw the Welcome to Calgary sign, and our journey across Canada was about to come to an end. If you want a more detailed description and pictures of each day, you can visit my YouTube channel at Wayne Miller 4377, and I have a playlist there called Cross Canada Trip 2025. It has a separate video for each day.